Welcome to the People's View. I'm your host, Carl Seidel. The People's View is sponsored by the Nashua Republican City Committee, and you can find out more about the activities of the committee by going to its website, nashuagop.org. We meet on the second Thursday of the month at the Crown Plaza Hotel Auditorium, and we'd like to see you there.
Welcome to The People's View, a program dedicated to discussing local, state, and national issues and their effect on the American people. The People's View provides a platform for state representatives and national figures to present their viewpoint. Whether it's social, economic, or financial topics, you'll hear it on The People's View.
Hello and welcome to the People's View. I'm Carl Seidel, and today our guest is Senator Kelly Ayotte. Kelly, very welcome here.
It's great to be with you, Carl. Appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy lady.
Well, always glad to sit down with you, and particularly to be in Nashua.
Okay, well, maybe next time we'll get you down to D.C. and we'll get you on Skype.
Oh, sure. Be happy to Skype, but even better to be in Nashua.
Yeah, of course. Well, you have so many problems we hardly know where to start, but ACA, or Obamacare as many have named it, is our biggest problem right now. I know I have people that are, my children that are having problems getting on, and I understand that you're entering that way too, and taking the hardship with the rest of us.
Yeah, no, my husband was trying to sign up as well, so experiencing some of the difficulties. I think the issue really is, I'm hearing from people in New Hampshire, I'm getting letters from people who are writing with concerns about, first it was the cancellation notices for people's policies, and as well as premium increases that are being accounted for by the Affordable Care Act, and some people's deductibles have gone up significantly. And then, of course, we only have one insurer on our exchange.
That's right.
And 10 of the 26 hospitals are excluded, including Southern New Hampshire. So people very concerned about if they sign up on the exchange and they're able to do it, and by the way, a lot of problems obviously that we've had with the website, but if they're able to do it, what if your doctor was associated with Southern New Hampshire? I mean, you could lose your doctor, and so I'm getting a lot of letters about that. And then finally, the way that employers that are 50 or more have to comply with the law, and the president has delayed the employer mandate for a year, but some employers are already looking ahead and telling some of their employees, well, we're going to drop your hours. And so many complaints I'm getting from people in New Hampshire about the impact of the law. And right now, obviously, it's much deeper than a website, the problems with the law.
Well, there's a number of things. One, I understand that there was somebody in the legislature that wants to increase the definition of a full-time employee to 40 hours.
I'm actually co-sponsoring a number of pieces of legislation. I have voted to repeal the law, and I think we should get back to the drawing table, but also to deal with specific pieces of the law. One of them is a piece of legislation that I'm a co-sponsor of. It's bipartisan, that would change the definition of the work week back from 30 hours under this law to 40 hours, which has been the traditional work week, because we don't want people's hours being cut because of how employees are defined, full-time employment is defined under this law. Other areas where I'm co-sponsoring legislation, the law limited the use of health savings accounts, so restoring the full use of health savings accounts for people that want that vehicle for their health care. And in addition to that, I'm also the co-sponsor of a bill that will ensure the security and verification of information that people put on the exchange.
That's a big problem.
I think it's a real worry, because you want to make sure a lot of personal information that you're required to submit, making sure that that's secure. So there are a number of issues that need to be addressed, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to do that because it's important.
Well, do you think that, well, this repeal apparently isn't going to work, but I know you have to put that up for a vote anyway, but do you think that as a way of attacking individual elements of that could be changed more easily?
Well, the way I look at it, Carl, I have voted to repeal the law. I think that there are better ways we can address healthcare costs and access for people. However, right now the votes aren't there.
Yeah.
The Democrats are in charge of the Senate. They wouldn't vote for that. Obviously, it's the president's signature piece of legislation. And what I want to do is provide whatever relief I can for my constituents. And that's why I'm not only, I've voted for repeal, but there's a whole host of pieces of legislation to try to address specific issues that are raised by this law that I'm co-sponsoring. And I don't want people to experience the difficulty that they're experiencing right now, whether it's through the website, whether it's through loss of a policy that they wanted, whether it's through not being able to keep their doctor. That's not how we should be addressing healthcare. How about more choice, more competition for health
That's
insurance
right.
companies that will drive down costs? How about looking at issues like right now, I know the state insurance commissioner extended the high-risk pool in our state for a year because he was worried that those people wouldn't be able to sign on to the exchange. Well, why aren't we looking at the high-risk pools that states have had to help deal
Sure.
with pre-existing conditions? So I think right now what you're experiencing is really a lot of people are being harmed and are seeing changes that they didn't expect from this. So I want to work to address that and to also address healthcare costs, which I think this law is bringing us in the wrong direction, having healthcare costs more.
Definitely. Yeah, I think, too, people are used to having choices in their life. They have to make choices. They have to plan depending on what their circumstance is. The idea that you can have one healthcare outline policy for everybody,
Right.
I think is kind of ridiculous.
Well, exactly, more choice for people. And I think the issue is also keeping your physician. I mean, this is a very personal relationship with your physician. And if we're going to this model of more limited networks, which it seems to be where this law is taking us, then people are going to have less choice in terms of what physician they want to keep. And I don't think that's certainly not what I've heard from people in New Hampshire, what they want, or the people of this country want. That's a very important relationship between your doctor and yourself. And for many people, it's a long relationship that they've had in place for a long time.
Well, I mentioned this before, but I think the Forbes article last week or two ago gave an outline of a nice thing. We talked about some of the elements that you mentioned, a savings account, the high-risk pool.
Right.
I mean, it works for auto insurance. Why can't it work for this? And you treat the people that are having problems with, in the past, being cut off or limited in some way.
Absolutely.
You can deal with that.
And we need to, and
Yeah.
and that's a real issue that needs to be addressed and should be addressed. And I think right now the markets are so, each state is a stovepipe
That's
on
right.
health insurance instead of being a national market where people have more choice and more competition.
And that was the element, too, that they mentioned. Let's have insurers go across state lines.
Right, exactly, Carl.
And all those things.
Because
unfortunately.
we right now are put in a position in New Hampshire with the exchange where there's one insurer who stepped up to do it. So that one insurer holds all the cards there.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so how is that competitive? How does that give people more choice?
And there's a lot of things in there that are going to come through the courts, too, right?
There
All
are
these
still some
things
legal
about-
challenges being raised
Right.
to it, and those will go forward. But most of all, I hope we can get back to the drawing board and really address these issues like cost, more choice, more competition for
Well, if
people.
they have a disaster in implementing the service that they're supposedly going to be able to give, I'm sure people are going to really react to that.
Well, of course. I mean, I know that they've put in a lot of work recently to the front part of the website and improving that, but there's still a lot of concerns that I've heard in terms of the back side of the website. And what that means is that once I sign up, will the information that I have put in there get accurately transmitted to the insurance company and then to my provider, whether it's the hospital or the doctor? And so we've got to, that back end has to be right too, because you don't want people signing up and then getting, going to get care. And can you imagine being in a situation where you think you have it and yet that information didn't get accurately transmitted? So there still are website issues on the back end that need to be addressed. And I think the whole thing has been really frustrating.
Well, as I understand it, too, the doctors and hospitals still are not sure how they're going to be paid.
Well, that's the issue, the back end issue. So if I show up and I show up to see my physician, or I show up at a hospital and I think I have insurance, but the back end, the information wasn't transmitted properly,
Yeah.
can you imagine what if you get that big bill? Or what if they say, we're not going to treat you? I mean, that's a real problem, and he has to be addressed.
I don't know how the legislators who voted for it could not spend the time looking at such a piece of legislation. I mean, it's a monster with over 2,000 pages.
Yeah, it's been a real mess
and they're
right
always
now.
finding out something. One thing that I only recently heard about was the panels that are going to decide on what procedures are going to be appropriate.
Yeah, what that is called is the IPAB board.
Right.
So that board is a board that will decide what gets covered. And basically, the board itself, I mean, I've heard a lot of feedback from physicians concerned about the makeup of the board and how it will work. I'm actually the co-sponsor of a piece of legislation that would repeal the IPAB board.
Oh, good.
And so I've heard from healthcare providers real concern about how that board will work. And it's also set up in a way that it essentially would require a supermajority of Congress to disapprove something that it does. So it doesn't, it
And
limits,
there's only a small period you have to
correct,
do that.
and it limits congressional review on those decisions as well. And I think that's a real mistake, because if this board makes a decision that has a negative impact on people, you should be able to go to your legislator and say, well, why is this board, and if legislation's appropriate, go through the normal course. And this would really change some of that by making it harder to do that.
It's difficult to get some of those decisions made by some of the groups now with Medicare.
Right.
I've worked for a pharmaceutical company, and I know how inappropriate it is if one area is not broadly understanding of the medical treatment. You know, they look at a narrow way that they might have been a urologist, and this had something to do with giving birth to babies or something.
Right.
You know?
I mean, the board it puts you in a situation where ultimately rationing. And so I have a lot of concerns about that board. That's why I've agreed to co-sponsor the legislation repealing it. But it's not something that just I've looked at. I've heard a lot from medical professionals who certainly appreciate their advice on that issue.
Some of this high technology groups, and I think it's going to stymie new methodology that's
Well,
being
one thing that's
discovered.
in the law that's going to stymie innovation is the medical device tax.
And that's another one
No,
you have to know. You know?
one of the ways that the law was funded is a 2.3% tax on medical device companies. And it's a tax on their revenue, so as opposed to the profit. And so what it does is if you're a new startup, before you even make a profit, this tax goes into place. So it really, for startups, is really difficult. So think about that new idea of getting the best medical technology for people. And it's very broad in its application. It applies, can apply to things like orthodontics. And so it's very, very broad in terms of what it hits and what's defined as a medical device. And it's actually an area where there was a vote on the budget resolution in the spring, and there was a majority in the Senate. Democrats who supported the law actually have voted now, some of them, to repeal it. So there's bipartisan support to repeal that tax, because worried about innovation in medical devices, of us getting the best products and the new products to treat people and to save lives. And also it drives up healthcare costs, because that 2.3% ultimately is going to get passed on to everyone's healthcare costs.
All those costs are going to go out there.
Yeah.
In a way, it's going to be hard to figure out what the increase is going to be, because it's going to the people, and you're not going to be able to total it up very easily.
Right, and our goal is to drive down healthcare costs. So when you put in a tax that hurts quality, innovation, and jobs, by the way, we've got a lot of very good jobs that in New Hampshire, and great medical device companies in New Hampshire, and drives up healthcare costs. It's counter to what we want to do to drive down healthcare costs.
And that's the kind of business we're trying to get here in New Hampshire.
Oh,
too,
these are very good jobs. They're well-paying jobs, And they're the kind of jobs that we want to expand, not just in New Hampshire, but across the country.
Definitely, definitely. Well, maybe we ought to get off on a couple other things
Sure.
too, because we've been spending a while on this.
Well,
but
there's a
we
lot
could
to talk
spend-
about in healthcare.
It is,
Yeah.
and maybe next time you're on, we can find out if any of this stuff has changed. I'm kind of wondering if anything can change in that
Sure,
a
absolutely.
couple times. But let's go back to some of the other things that we talked about before. I know you've been on the shows talking still about Benghazi and some of the other little supposedly phantom scenarios but this is not a transparent government. And I know and I appreciate your pushing to make it more transparent.
Well,
find out
this
what
has
the
been
heck's
really
happening.
frustrating because obviously we had Ambassador Stevens, who was murdered, and 3 other brave Americans on September 11th, over a year ago now, in a terrorist attack at our consulate. It took place in the middle of the election, and frankly, the way it was represented to the American people wasn't what happened. I mean, it was blamed on a spontaneous reaction to a heinous video, and it was a terrorist attack. So, I mean, and we did not have military assets that responded, even though the attack was a phased attack that was the initial attack, and then within 6 hours, another set of attacks where 2 other Americans were murdered. And so I've had a lot of questions about it that it's been hard to get the answers from the administration. They've been very reluctant. And so we're continuing to make sure that we get the information, because what we don't want is to have it happen again. And we also don't want, if a situation like that happens, we want the American people to get the straight facts about it.
Well, I don't know if you heard just this morning about the death there.
I did. Very, very sad, unfortunate. As I understand it, a teacher was
Yes.
murdered in
On his way
Benghazi,
home.
Libya, an American. And
American,
so our thoughts and prayers are with the family of the person that was murdered. And Libya is obviously a very dangerous location. And one of the things that's frustrating when I look at what happened in Benghazi is there were warning signs. There were so many warning signs. In fact, there was a set of cables that really should have gone up the chain of command, especially to the Secretary of State, where we should have either closed that consulate or reinforced it with more security.
Right.
Including, cables right from the ambassador saying that in August, saying that the consulate could not withstand a coordinated attack. The British left, the French left, the Red Cross, after an attack, everyone had left. The Americans, as some people have described it who were there working, the last flag flying. So it was unfortunate that those warning signs weren't heeded by leadership.
Is it possible that you're going to have to subpoena to get some of these witnesses that have not been made available to the
Well, Carl, I
committee?
know that the House is looking at that. The House Oversight Committee is looking at subpoenas. In the Senate, I'm a Republican and so in the minority. So without the agreement of the majority of the Democrats, we couldn't subpoena anyone. But I know that the House is continuing to conduct oversight over this, and they could exercise subpoena power over this. And it's important that we get the truth.
But this transparent administration is just hiding people, and they're moving people. Nobody's been fired for any of these scenarios. They still have the people from the IRS. that are
No,
doing
I mean,
this
you got the people from the IRS, you've got the people from the State Department that
Right.
were initially in the ARB report that was done by the State Department itself on the Benghazi terrorist attack that were said to be responsible for it, and they weren't fired. So you're right, no one was held accountable,
I mean,
unfortunately.
not even suspended. Well, I guess they moved them around. That's
They
about
did. I mean,
it.
but there was not.
And that's a joke.
That is a joke. There was no accountability there, unfortunately, and it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's wrong. And you know what? The families deserve full answers. And by the way, one of the most important issues there, how about bringing the people who committed this to justice? So, there have been reports that at least one individual and maybe others are already under a position where we have may have arrested them or indicted them. That's been in the media. And why haven't we brought them to justice? And why not bring them and make sure that they're held accountable for the terrorist attacks that they committed against our country. The president said that he would ensure that justice was done. No one's been held accountable who committed the attack. And I had a meeting with the FBI director recently, within 2 weeks, and I pressed him on this and the FBI and saying, come on, let's hold people accountable.
Well, I hope you can get some action out of that, but it really seems that there's, either shifting people around or deflecting the topic to something else.
Yeah.
There's always some new thing to forget about, and it's going to be kind of hard to forget about Obamacare.
And there needs to be a full accounting on the IRS issue, too, I believe. That's a very important issue.
Yeah, and you're going to have, this budgeting question is coming up.
Yes.
Now, that's going to be a big
That is the overriding, most important issue right now coming on the forefront. And that is the funding of the government expires January 15th. And I returned to Washington on Monday. The budget conference is supposed to report out the 14th. There are ongoing discussions right now. But getting funding for the government for the rest of the year, responsible funding, is incredibly important. You know, having served in the state legislature, you have to balance your budget.
That's right.
You actually have to have a budget, and you have to make the decisions that need to be made to do that. And we need to make sure we do that well before the January 15th deadline. I think people are tired of the drama. And frankly, no more shutdowns. Make sure that we get the government funded, in responsible ways, obviously.
Yeah.
We have $17 trillion in debt, and we have to think about the fiscal state of the country.
Well, there's all sorts of doom and gloom scenarios on the websites, about our whole fiscal situation.
Well, we're
it's not-
$17 trillion in debt, and, great challenges. We have programs like Medicare, the trustees, independent trustees, not Republicans, Democrats, just actuarial trustee analysis, goes bankrupt in 2026. Social Security in 2033. The Disability Fund within Social Security, 2016. So this is the overriding issue, the fiscal state of the country.
That's right. And the fact that this has been ongoing for those programs is really bothering me, because people don't see that that's what's going to happen to the ACA if we don't correct it.
Correct. You're right.
And it's going to be
How
even
is
a
it
bigger
financial? How is it
disaster.
sustainable, exactly, for people? And especially as you look at programs that are important to seniors, Medicare, Social Security, we need to preserve them. Because otherwise, if you just let them go, then people who are relying on them will be put in a very bad situation, and that's not right.
No. And some of the things that they've been throwing out, I don't know if I guess you must have heard about the things that are going to be done to the military, where they're going to be a wage freeze and the commissaries are going to close. Now, that sounds like really a certain backway.
Well, and right now, the sequester only addressed 40% of spending, so the military is taking a disproportionate cut.
Right.
Instead of looking at the big picture of really solving these problems, a responsible budget, taking on the drivers of the $17 trillion in debt. That's what needs to be done for the country, and for our military, for all of us, and in particular also the future of the country. I think, as a mother of 2 children, what is it, if we don't get this right, this debt only gets bigger, and they're going to pay it back, and we're going to put that on their backs.
Their children are going to pay it back.
It's not right.
No, it isn't. But, well, let's hope somebody wakes up.
Yes,
And maybe
I hope so.
2014 we can do something about it like we did in 2010 in this state.
We need to.
We did do the hard job of balancing the budget in 2010 or 11. And I think just going to have to do it on a federal level.
That's why I support a balanced budget amendment.
Good.
Because I do think we need some limits on Washington.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think we're growing too fast. I mean, adding all these people. I don't know if the administration has added 10 or 20,000 IRS people just to enforce the
I know. I certainly know it's thousands, because the IRS is the primary enforcement mechanism. Because of course, if you don't purchase the health insurance, then you can be fined by the IRS. and they administer that, and so they've hired additional people to do that.
And they take your, they get the money right out of your income tax
Right.
refunds.
Exactly.
Well, you know, there's so many things there that are going wrong. I just don't know about, you know, how we're going to get around to some of these things. You have this Iran pact that you're, I don't know, do you get to approve that, or do you,
No, well,
does the
right
Senate-
now, the president, Secretary Kerry,
Yeah.
the administration has entered into negotiations
Right.
and agreement, basically a 6-month agreement with Iran. I don't get to approve that in the Congress. However, what we can do is, I have a lot of concerns about the agreement. Most of all because it still allows Iran to continue enriching uranium. We have to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon because of the danger it will present. They're the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. They want to annihilate Israel from the face of the earth. They've called us the Great Satan. And so this agreement as it stands right now still allows, that has not required them to dismantle any centrifuges that are needed to enrich the uranium. And the enriched uranium is what is used for nuclear weapons capability, you know, not for nuclear power. And in addition to that, no centrifuge is dismantled. There's a plutonium reactor that within Iran that they've been working on, and that needs to be dismantled too. So we've got to stop them from having a nuclear weapon. And I am for us doing that through a peaceful means, but I'm concerned that this agreement really isn't strong enough. It's not having them. We've lifted some sanctions, and they haven't taken as much action as they should, dismantling their centrifuges, the plutonium reactor, as well as making sure this enriched uranium that they have now they can't use. And so I think what we'll do in the Congress on a bipartisan basis, we'll put in additional sanctions that if Iran doesn't meet certain markers, to help, but really to back up, to say to the administration and to Iran that if Iran doesn't meet these markers, if we think they're just really playing us, then the sanctions will go into effect. If they meet certain markers, then the sanctions won't go into effect. So that's where I think Congress will make a difference on this. And when I get back to Washington, this will be one of the issues that I'll be very involved in.
The agreement now doesn't have those milestones in there.
It doesn't. In my view, the agreement is not strong enough right
Okay.
now. And we need, as the Congress, on a bipartisan basis, we've been very unified on this issue of Iran not getting a nuclear weapon. And I believe that we will, on a bipartisan basis, pass additional
Good.
sanctions to really put some teeth in saying, if you don't do this, then these sanctions will go into effect. And I think that's important.
Have the current sanctions actually started to be alleviated right now, or are they?
As part of the agreement that the
Yeah.
administration has, they're going to lift some of the sanctions.
But they haven't been lifted yet?
They've agreed to lift some of them.
Okay.
So that's in the process. Now, some of them are still in effect, certainly some of the sanctions, but it took a long time to get this sanction regime in place. It certainly is having an effect on Iran, and we need real results from them before we continue to lift any sanctions, in my view.
Yeah, I agree
Because
with
we
you there.
cannot, the world with Iran having a nuclear weapon is a much more dangerous place to not only our country, but to our allies.
Well, a lot of our allies are a little bit worried right now.
They're very worried. I mean, our allies, Prime Minister Netanyahu from Israel has said that this agreement is a big mistake, and Israel's a very important ally with us. You know, people like the Saudis and others in the area that don't think this agreement is strong enough. And so I share their concerns, and I think as a member of Congress that we should have a backstop to say, here's sanctions. Iran, you need to understand, you're really going to dismantle these centrifuges. You're really going to address this enriched uranium. You're not going to further build this plutonium reactor, or you'll see additional sanctions from us.
And you said this legislation, is that being generated by the Senate or the House?
Right now, there's discussions in the Senate.
Okay.
Absolutely. The House has already passed legislation to impose additional sanctions on Iran. That was before these negotiations. So there certainly is a vehicle that's there from the House, but the discussions really right now are in the Senate on this issue.
Okay. The House is also doing something on this immigration law that the Senate has passed, isn't there? They have to act or have something on their own?
They haven't yet brought anything up on it, so
Okay.
I don't know yet whether they will consider either the whole piece of legislation or pieces of it. And so they haven't yet said that they'll do that.
I see that the speaker has hired somebody who's been involved in, I don't know whether he was involved in the Senate's legislation or not.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that, but I'll certainly
Yeah, I was
look
just
into
wondering
that.
whether that meant that they were more receptive, because what you read in the paper is they were against what the Senate.
Yeah, I really don't know whether the House will take it up. I think that our immigration system is very broken, and so
All the way through.
it is, both on the illegal immigration issue
Right,
and
and
also
illegal.
making sure that we get the best and the brightest and the people that
That's
come
right.
here to help us grow our economy. We're a nation of immigrants, so on both ends, the legal end and the illegal immigration side.
Now that bothers me a little bit, that I don't see anybody taking care of the legal, how long it takes to get a legal
Right. That's an
citizen in
issue
place.
where there were people who were legitimately going through all the paces as they should,
5
following
to
our
10
laws,
years or even longer.
and people who also go to our best institutions
Right.
and instead go start their business somewhere else, and they could help us grow our economy. So we have a lot of issues that need to be addressed.
Yeah, that seems like we're fixing the wrong part. If you fix that part, maybe some of the people will wait and do it.
And you know, the House
Legally.
could decide to take up pieces of it, but we haven't yet heard whether they'll do it. I just hope they do, because this problem only gets worse.
Yeah,
And so it's time for us to really work together and try to solve it.
I agree. Well, boy, we got a lot of things.
Yes, a lot of topics.
I really pleased to have you here to talk about us and tell our audience about what's happening down
Thank
there.
you.
I
Thank
think
you.
we need somebody as active as you. I don't know how you do it, especially
Well,
with two little kids.
Well, I have a
and
lot
a
of help,
family.
a lot of great
Yeah.
family, married well.
Right,
My
right.
husband Joe is a great support to me,
Oh yeah, I bet.
and my
him.
parents live close. Nashua, of course, is my home, and I was born here, and we still live here, and so I'm fortunate to have a lot of family in the area too.
Well, I hope if you're here, you're not going to be here next week, though, are you?
Next week I have to go back to Washington. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, I was going to make sure you got to our Christmas party.
Oh,
but,
love to be there, but we'll be
we'll
in
see.
D.C. So
well,
appreciate
good luck
it.
back there, and
Thanks,
thank
Carl.
you again, and we'll be in touch so we can do it from Washington. We got
All
that
right, that sounds
okay?
great.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.